Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Jacob Teacher YouTube channel. As you can see, I have a guest today. I am here with my brother, Benny. He is traveling right now. He's from Canada like I am, and he's visiting me here in Korea. We're going to have a conversation today. We're going to talk about failure and what failure means and how we should think about it, or at least we're going to discuss some opinions about that. And yeah, hopefully we can have a great conversation. I know that I didn't really tell too many people about this. It's kind of an impromptu lesson. We didn't plan it much, but we're gonna have a conversation. We're gonna see how it goes. We have to meet some people in about half an hour, in 30 minutes, so it will also be a short conversation. Nevertheless, we're both excited to be here. I have the chat room open, the chat window, so I can see if you are, if you want to leave some comments. If you have questions, feel free to ask them. I would really love to answer your questions. So would Benny. So let me know in the comment section. Tell me where you're watching from and ask any questions you have. Benny,
Jacob.
I was wondering, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody who's watching
Sure.
a few things about yourself.
So, hello everybody. My name is Benny. I am Jacob's younger and more handsome brother. Right now, I'm on vacation. So I live in Canada, but for the last month, I have been traveling. This is my fourth country that I've been to in the last month. I was also in Cambodia, Vietnam, and Japan before this. So this is my last stop here in Korea, and then I head back home to Canada. Back in Canada, what I do is I've been studying for many years to become a doctor. So I still have several years to go, but at the end of all of this studying, I'm going to become a doctor, and then that'll be my life back in Canada. And this vacation has been very fun, and it's been my last big vacation before I go back to school.
We have Lanya watching too. So hello, Lanya. Thanks for watching. Feel free to call out to or talk to anyone you see.
Hi, Lanya.
Talk to anyone you see who's leaving messages too. All right, sweet. So I wanted to talk about failure today in particular because Benny yesterday showed me a speech that he gave at his, what was it, your graduation from medical school?
Yes, my graduation was just about a month ago, and at the celebration, I gave a speech in front of the class, sort of a celebration speech or a speech to motivate people.
And you were talking about failure too, right?
Yeah, I tried to make failure the theme of the speech, which might seem a little bit strange, but as I'm sure we'll get into, I think failure is very important, actually.
Yeah, and you started with this awesome story in the speech that made me laugh. And I was wondering if you could share it with everyone who's watching now.
Definitely. So this was one of my funnier failures in medical school. This happened about 2 years ago. Basically, what happened was I was working in a hospital, and there was an old lady who needed surgery on her hip. And so my job was to go check on her and make sure that she was okay for surgery, make sure that she was okay to go ahead with surgery and that everything would be okay. Um, Now, she was on the top floor of the hospital with a beautiful view of the water in the city. So I went into her room and I asked her how she was doing that morning. And it turns out that she was very upset and was having a very difficult time in the hospital. There were lots of things going wrong because her hip was hurting, she was in a lot of pain, she couldn't sleep very well, the food was making her sick in the hospital, and all of this was making her very worried and anxious about her surgery. So I felt sorry for this woman. So I said, I'm very sorry to hear that, but I tried to cheer her up. So I said, at least you have a very nice view of the water in here. And after I said that, there was a little bit of a pause, and then she rose her head and she said, I'm blind. So that was very, very embarrassing for me. I felt very bad, and I just closed my mouth for the rest of it and did the assessment as fast as I could, and then I left.
Yeah, so that must have been very awkward. Let me just say right now, too, if you're watching the structure of this lesson, we're not going to actually teach any language points today. You can think of this as listening practice, okay? We're just going to have a conversation, um, talk about a few different things, and you can practice your listening, I guess. So there won't be any real language lessons today. Now, what did that teach you about failure, or how did you respond to that? Because that is obviously a situation in which you're going to feel embarrassed. What happened? How do you stomach that?
Yeah, definitely. That was extremely embarrassing. So at the time, all that I could do was apologize to her and then carry on, basically as if it never happened, and just do the best job that I could moving forward. Um, but when you talk about failure in general, even though it might be embarrassing or difficult to stomach, as you put it, I think that every time you make a mistake and every time you fail, there is an opportunity to learn something. In this case, it was actually quite simple. Every patient has a chart of information about them that usually sits outside their room. And if I had just looked at that chart a little more intensely or a little more carefully before I entered the room, I would have seen and I would have known that she was blind before I started talking to her. So that was one simple lesson that I learned, and thankfully, this was a small mistake. In medicine, you can make all sorts of mistakes. Hopefully, you only make the smaller ones. But even with the smaller ones, there's always something to be learned. So that's what I learned that time.
That's great. And so we have a few comments here. So Lanya says, "I'm sorry to hear that, and it's kind of funny." Yes, Lanya, I agree. It's kind of funny in a dark way. It made me laugh, and it made the whole room laugh in the where you were giving the speech too. So there is something funny about it. And someone else is asking where we are right now. Right now we are in Korea on Jeju Island. It's about 4 o'clock or 4:37 p.m. right now. If you can hear some noise, by the way, I've talked about this a few times. There's a construction site right outside of my room, and they work all the time. So that's what that noise is. Failure, yeah. So it's funny too. Well, I think it's incredibly important too in the context of learning a new language, because that is something that obviously requires repeated failures before you actually get better. And for me too, as a teacher, so I came to Korea about 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. I had never taught before, so it was my first time teaching. And I remember the first class that I ever had. I walked in. I was all dressed up in my nice clothes, which I didn't need to wear. The other teachers, when I got there, they weren't dressed nearly as formally as I was. So that was a little embarrassing at first too. And then I remember standing in front of this class of 30 Korean students or so, uh, and just I had a lesson planned, but the lesson, it turned out, was way too complicated for them, and I thought about it. I had thought about it for hours before, so I had this lesson planned, but they didn't understand anything. As soon as I started speaking, I realized that they had this look on their face. It was so clear that they had no idea what I was saying. And when I get really nervous too, I start sweating a lot. It's just a terrible thing that happens to me. So I remember I just started pouring sweat. There's a nice English phrase. Sometimes when we sweat, we can describe it as pouring sweat, when we sweat a lot. So I remember standing in front of this class, and I was sweating and sweating, and nothing was going right. It was the worst class of all time. It was absolutely terrible. I failed horribly. And I remember even after that class, one of the teachers came, and they brought me a bottle of water because I was sweating so clearly. It was horribly embarrassing. But the point is, of that story, for me at least, and I think the point of your story too, or how I responded to it, was I remember I thought, okay, that just happened. It was terrible. I failed miserably, and I have to go do it again tomorrow. That was the reality of my situation. I came here as a teacher. I have to go to a new school and teach a new class tomorrow. And I did it. I just did it. And the next class was a little bit better. It was still terrible. I was still sweating horribly. Uh, but eventually, if for me, it was very valuable because it taught me that when I start something new, I should expect to fail at it. I should be prepared to fail at it. And if you're okay with that, if you're okay with that failure, if you're okay with being really bad at something, that's half the battle right there. You're only going to go up from there. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely right. I think the thing that you don't want to do is let yourself believe that everything is always going to go as planned or as expected. The last thing that you ever want to do is be too confident that things are always going to work out perfectly. Because as everybody knows, that's usually not the case.
Yeah.
Sometimes something is going to happen that you weren't expecting, and it might not be the best outcome. But you have to be mentally prepared for that, and when it happens, you have to take it head on. You can't let it bring you down. You have to take it on as a challenge, and then I think if you do that, when you look back on it later, you realize that you actually grew a lot more than you would have otherwise, if there wasn't that unexpected change in events.
Yeah, I agree. So we have some questions here. Lanya is asking me if she says you couldn't speak Korean that time. So Lanya, a better way to phrase that question, by the way, it would be you couldn't speak Korean back then, or you weren't able to speak Korean at the time. And no, I wasn't. I could say maybe hello in Korean. I could say thank you. So I was standing in front of these students, and I couldn't speak a word to them. It was horrible. Their English level was particularly low too, so they had a hard time understanding me, and it was just it's still it makes me laugh and shiver to think about that class too. Din Imishov says, when you speak, your words are so clear. Why? Well, thank you. And I think Benny speaks quite clearly too, so I take that as a compliment. I don't know, but I think maybe when I was young, I think our grandma, she often talked to us. I don't know why, I'm just thinking about this now, but our grandma often talked to us about speech and the importance of speaking clearly, and I think she taught us some valuable lessons about speech. So whenever I'm speaking in these live lessons or in my classes at school in front of an audience, I always try to speak as clearly as possible. I don't really think about it; it just kind of happens. So thank you. Din says, "Are you in Korea this time?" Yeah, we are in Korea right now. Benny is just traveling, so he will be going back to Canada on Monday, right?
Monday, yeah. So I've got 3 more days here.
Cool. What else? I wanted to ask you. So we've talked about failure, the importance of failure. Now this is kind of easy to talk about right now after all of this has happened. But at the time, when you're in the moment and you're teaching a class that is going really bad, or you're telling a blind woman to enjoy her view, uh, it feels horribly embarrassing. So I want to ask you, what tips do you have for dealing with failure as it's happening? When you're in that moment, when everything is going wrong, you feel nervous, you feel this anxiety inside of you, and you just feel terrible. What tips do you have for dealing with that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it depends on really how bad things are going and the type of mistake that you're making. I'll give an example again from medicine. So let's say that you're performing a surgery and you're with a team of people and you make a mistake. In surgery, mistakes can sometimes be very big mistakes and they can lead to emergencies. So if you're performing a surgery and you make a big mistake, even though it's going to feel terrible at that time, you have to forget about all of that and just focus on the problem. And you need to call for help, and you need to put everything else aside and just focus on the surgery and the emergency. Calling for help actually is something that I think you can apply in all sorts of different types of mistakes. It's difficult sometimes because we tend to be a little bit proud. We sometimes don't like to ask for help, and we like to do things ourselves. But I think especially if we're having a difficult time and making mistakes, even if you're in the moment, you can ask for help. And I'm sure that the other teachers at the school, with your experience, would have been willing to help at that time.
Yeah, the problem was we didn't speak the same language, so asking for help is
right.
would have been a little difficult. But yeah, it's a good point. Well, we are proud a lot of the time, and yeah, it's strange. Why is that? Why can't we just ask for help? Why? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think that we like to be able to solve problems by ourselves. It makes us feel good when we really do something difficult and we know that we did it alone. And that, that's nice. But if you're having a hard time, then it's very valuable to reach out to somebody and say, can you help me? And you actually might learn a lot more from that than you did even by succeeding by yourself the first time. So that's I think one of the most important things that we can do while we're failing is to reach out to somebody and ask for help.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Definitely. I mean, especially learning a new language. Well, how would you put that in the context of learning a new language? So often, actually, I've asked many of my subscribers what they struggle with when it comes to learning English. What is the biggest problem they have? And one thing that many people say is essentially a lack of confidence. They don't feel confident, understandably so, speaking English to other people. They feel just essentially nervous. So what would you say to someone like that? Because, of course, the only way that you're going to get better speaking English is by speaking English with other people. So what would you say about that?
Well, I understand where they're coming from. I know that if I'm, for example, in Korea, and by the way, my Korean is basically zero. I know a few words, and that's about it. So I know that anytime I try to speak Korean, it sounds horrible to anybody who lives here. And that makes me feel a little bit less confident and not very confident about my Korean language skills. But what I'd like to do is reverse it in my mind, and I think to myself, how do I feel when somebody who doesn't speak English very well comes up to me and is asking me for directions or is asking me for help with something, and they're speaking English, but it's very broken English. It's not very good. Do I judge them? Absolutely not. I can still I help them, and I try to understand what they're saying. And if I can, then I'll send them in the right direction, or I'll help them with whatever they need help with. But at no point in that interaction am I thinking to myself, "Wow, this person's English is really terrible. They should really improve it." And so that's what I think to myself when I feel very unconfident about my abilities in a different language. I reverse the situation in my head, and I think when people come up to me and their English is not very good, it doesn't matter to me.
Right. And most of the time when people do react negatively to someone else who's asking them a question in English, most of the time when people respond negatively in general, it's because of stuff that's going on in their own life, I think. It has nothing to do with the other person. We have a question here from Lanya. I think you used the phrasal verb reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to explain what that means?
Yeah, it's basically a way of saying asking for something or connecting with somebody. So another way of saying asking for help would be reaching out for help. For example, I reached out to my friend because I was having a difficult time at school. You might use it in a sentence like that. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, well, actually, a good way to think about it, too, is like physically when you reach for something and you grab it, you can think about it the same way. If you need help or if you need to contact someone, you're reaching out, not physically, but with your words. You're contacting them, you're asking for help or whatever you need. Okay, so that's what that phrasal verb means. Thank you for the question, Lanya. Going back to tips for overcoming anxiety about speaking English or just anxiety about doing things that you're scared of doing. Here's something else. One thing that being an online English teacher has taught me so far. So I've been doing these videos online for maybe 2 months now. And at first, going live, I was absolutely terrified of it. This idea that I'd have to talk to my computer, and that what really scared me most is that after these live lessons, they get posted right on my YouTube channel. So everyone can see them. They're recorded on video. Everything that I say is right there, and other people can see them. So that really scared me. And often in the early stages when I was doing these live lessons, I remember I would say something during a live lesson, and in my head at the time I would think, oh my god, that is such a stupid thing to say. I can't believe I said that. And, the regular sounds start going off in my head. Oh, I'm such an idiot. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Sam is back with us. Nice to see you again, Sam. So anyways, at the time, during these live lessons, I'll say something that I think is really stupid. Luckily, I have it on video too. So what happens too, what I've noticed is if I say something that I think is really, really stupid, that I think other people will just find really stupid also, often I'll go back and I'll watch it. I'll take some time. I'll maybe wait an hour or a day or however long, and I'll go back and watch it. And I can see myself saying what I thought was really, really stupid. It's a little bit stupid sometimes, but the point is it's never as bad as I thought it was. So at the time when it's happening, I'm overreacting in my mind. I think that the problem is a lot worse than it actually is in reality. And when you go back and watch it again, you realize that it's not as terrible as you thought it was. So Sam is asking, who am I with? I'm with my brother, Sam. This is Benny. He is traveling from Canada. He's here for the weekend in Korea with me. So yeah, we're doing this live lesson. We actually have to go pretty soon to meet our friends. We're traveling with doctors this weekend. Hey, a bunch of doctors are hanging out at my place.
Yeah, so I just finished medical school about a month ago, and we start work in a few weeks. So for the last month, I've been traveling with some of my friends from my class. It's like our last big vacation before we start work. And so 2 of them are coming to Jeju today, so we're going to go meet them and show them around.
Yeah, and we actually have to get going right now to meet them. We're meeting them at 5 o'clock Korean time at a cafe close to here, which is in 8 minutes, so we will probably be pretty late. And doctors, they like everything to be on schedule. So, I don't know, do you think they're going to be mad at us?
Oh, they might be. We'll find out. We'll find out.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. I wish we could be here longer. I hope you found this valuable, this quick conversation about failure. And yeah, I hope that the next time you're feeling like you failed at something, or the next time you're nervous about speaking English, or whatever it is in your life, I hope that you can remember this conversation and try and at least think about failure in a different way as it's happening and afterwards too. Anything else you want to say quickly?
No, thanks for having me. This was fun. Yeah, again, on that point, I would say just remember failure, even though it sucks in the moment, it's very, very important, and you can't succeed without failing. So anytime you make a mistake, just learn as much as you can from it.
Absolutely. That's very important. I agree too. Okay, we have one last question. Are you from Canada? Yes, we are both Canadian. We're in Korea at the moment, both Canadian. That's all for today. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. I will be back on this channel next week, probably next Tuesday again, but make sure to follow me on Facebook, because that's where I post about whenever my live lessons that are upcoming. Also, if this is your first time here, welcome. Make sure to subscribe to my channel, and you're free as always to like and share this stuff if you enjoy it, if you find these videos valuable. It would be a great help to me. Sam says, hello, Benny. It's so nice to see you. Your faces are similar. Yes, I know I'm the more handsome brother too, so thank you for that. We will see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend.